Hello everyone, I am back with
Nicholas Jordan.
aka my boyfriend, and today for my final project I will be reading the answers to the questions I asked him for the from the first audio and getting his reaction and input on the questions. So the first question I asked him was,
what's it like dating a black girl in this era, 2020?
I obviously asked my mother that question, which was another way of saying it was, what was it like dating a black guy in your era instead of a black girl? And her response to that was, it wasn't very hard for her friends to get used to it because they went to a public school with mixed races, but it was harder for my dad because he grew up in Chattagee, and his school was mainly black people. So when he introduced my mom to his friends, it was very odd for them, and whenever they would go out, it was very awkward, and my mom would always get harassed by other black girls for saying, "Oh, you're taking away our black men." So yes, my mom said it was very difficult at first, but they got used to it. So what's your reaction to that, knowing that your answer was, it's not that hard because, everyone's kind of used to it now?
Yeah, well, it's kind of impressive to see how much times have changed and how, we wouldn't get too much criticism from anybody really, compared to your mom, who got a lot of criticism from your dad's friends and people that he went to school with and stuff like that. So it's pretty impressive to see how times have changed.
The next question that I asked Nicholas from the beginning was
it a problem for your parents finding out that I was black?
So, I asked my parents both, I asked them both this question because it was very hard for a black person to date a white person to date a black person, so I ended up asking both my parents this question. And for my mom, her response was, it was very hard, it was very confusing at first for my grandparents because my mom wasn't friends with many black people. She played basketball in high school and college, but she wasn't necessarily friends with them. They were more their own clique, and the whites and everyone else was another clique. So when my mom brought my dad home, it was a bit weird for my grandparents because they're like, how do you all of a sudden you just have a black boyfriend? And my mom said it took a couple months for my grandparents to actually get used to my dad dating my mom, especially because of their age difference. My dad is 8 years older than my mom. So it was a bit awkward at first, but my grandparents have learned to love my dad, and yeah, they have a great relationship now. Now for my dad's side, it was a bit more difficult because my grandparents are pastors in church and are very religious and are very black with black, white with white, etc. So for my dad, it was actually a bit harder for him to bring my mom home because my dad was actually married before he met my mom to a black lady. And when they got divorced, it was kind of hard for my grandparents to see my dad with another lady, especially because she was white. So when he introduced my mom to his parents, it was a bit hard for them, but it was a bit easier, I guess, for my black grandparents to accept than my white grandparents because they were raised in church, yes, but they know how to love every race as their own. So yeah, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so it's sort of like your dad's side, how they're very religious. My family is pretty religious too, especially my mom's side. So as I said in the last interview, they didn't really care. They looked at the person as a person. They looked at you as a person and not by your skin color. So it's pretty cool to see that your dad's side of the family was so open to your mom, enjoying the family.
And for my mom's parents?
For your mom's parents, I'm sure back then it was a huge thing, and it's pretty cool to see that they were so open to joining the family, and they were actually welcoming to it.
Yeah, especially because it was very normal. But
yeah.
I asked both of my parents this next question because it affected them equally back then, and the question was,
in the beginning of our relationship, did you think that me being black would be a problem in the future?
So first I will be sharing my mom's response. She said at first she was a bit scared for their future when dating each other because they didn't know what their kids would have to go through being half black, half white, if they would have to, be with only black people or be with only white people, and or don't know if what kinds of like races they should be friends with. And it sounds a bit silly, but that was actually a fault and something scary for my parents, especially for my mom. She never grew up with any interracial kids or even mixed races in general, like for example Indian and Chinese. Like everyone was their own race. So yeah, she was a bit nervous. And for my dad too, she was a bit nervous because she knew that he would get a lot of hate from his friends because his friends never dated any white girls or any other race except any other race except for black women. So she was a bit scared because she didn't know what the future held. But as the years came on, racism, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist because it definitely does, but it's a bit easier on them now. But my mom obviously never knew that going through the years. So yeah, and for my dad, it was kind of the same thing. He thought that him going out with my mom would be a big problem for a lot of white people, especially because interracial couples wasn't a big thing in the 80s and 90s. It was obviously a thing, but not as big as it is now. So he was a bit scared about, example, for, like I said again, for his kids, just knowing that he didn't want his kids to be called racial slurs, and he didn't want his kids having to grow up with, it's not that he didn't want his kids to have white parents and black parents, but the different views that both my grandparents had was a bit hard for him. So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, so these answers don't really surprise me. I'm sure like they thought about their kids and how they'd be growing up, and I'm sure they didn't expect times to change as much as they did, and especially racism to change as much as it did. I'm sure they thought it'd be a lot more of a thing than it actually is now, and I'm sure they're happy like looking at it now that it's not as much of a big deal as it was when they started dating.